Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads, where we are continuing in the Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. In our last video, there was a lot of discussion about Hermione and Hitler and the Axis itself. The mothers, there was some quotes about the mothers. We're talking about Pandora, Hermione, Zoe, all of this going on. And then there's the possibility that Hermione, so a site like Hermione, okay, so the place Hermione, not the person Hermione, could very well be the Axis. So we're looking at maps. They've gone into the Milk Monastery. We're looking at maps. So I'm going to show you on this page and the next, if I can, just so you can see. So there's the first map. And it says, I drew an invisible X with my finger across the axis, making a six-pointed asterisk, a Hegel rune like the one Wolfgang had drawn earlier in the air. At this point, it seemed far from coincidental that the first lines passed through Elias's home of the Eleusinian mysteries, continuing to the Macedonian peninsula where Mount Athos projects into Aegean, a site plastered here on the map with dozens of tiny crosses. A famous group of 20 monasteries built by the Emperor Theodosius, patron saint of Hieronymus. Athos was once a major repository of ancient manuscripts, repeatedly looted by the Turks and Slavs in innumerable Balkan wars. Its unusual location, equidistant from Mount Olympus on the Greek mainland and Troy on the Turkish, was visible from each. Perhaps Athos itself was yet another axis. The other line of my asterisk was even more interesting. It led to Olympia on the Alpheus River, home of the Olympic Games. I'd been there one weekend after a concert of Jersey's, I think that's her mother, in Athens. We'd hiked over broken stone beneath Mount Kronos. Aside from Olympia's famous ruins like the Temple of Zeus, there was a relic at Olympia that stuck in my mind. The Heronian temple of the goddess Hera, wife and sister to Zeus. Though built of plastered wood and less impressive than the Zeus temple, the original Heronian was constructed as early as 1000 BC and is the oldest extant temple in Greece. Okay, so there's another map here, so I'm going to turn and try to show you that. See if I can get it. Wait a minute. I can do it. Ha ha. Nope, that way. There we go. Not exactly straight, but there's the map and you can see the center where she's drawing her little X's and stuff. Okay. Then I knew why the name Hermione seemed so familiar, not just familia to me. In the myths, Hermione was the place Hera and Zeus first landed when they came to Greece from Crete, the entry point of the Olympic gods to the continent of Europe. Wolfgang, who'd been watching in silence as my finger traced the map beneath the glass, now turned to me. Astounding, he said. I've often walked by this map, but I've never saw the connection you've seen at first glance. A uniformed guard arrived and secured open the high inner doors, and Wolfgang and I entered the gold and white Baroque library of the Monastery of Milk. A wall of French windows at the far end overlooked a sprawling terracotta-colored terrace. Beyond it lay the Danube, its surface glittering like crystals in the morning sun, filling the vast library with bouncing light. As a custodian wiped one of the glass display cases dividing the room, a wiry, gray-haired man in a priest's cassock adjusted leather-bound books on a shelf partway down. He turned as we entered, smiled, and came towards us. He seemed somehow familiar. I hope you don't mind, Wolfgang said, taking my arm. I've asked someone to assist us. We went forward to greet him. Professor Hauser, said the priest, his English heavily flavored with Italian. I'm happy you and your American colleague were able to arrive early, as I asked. I've already prepared some things for you to see, but scusa signorina. Sorry, foreign language, not my thing. I forget myself. I am Father Virgillio, the library archivist. You will excuse my poor English, I hope. I come from Trieste. Then he added with a somewhat awkward laugh, Virgilio, it's a good name for a guide, like Virgil in the Divina Commedia, no? Was that who escorted Dante around paradise? I asked. No, that was Beatrice, a lovely young woman, I imagine very much as yourself, he added graciously. The poet Virgil, I apologize to say, guided him through purgatory, limbo, and hell. I hope your experience with me will be better. He laughed and added almost as an afterthought, but Dante had a third guide, as few seem to recall, one whose works are treasured here in our collection. Who's the third guide? I asked. Saint Bernard de Clairvaux. A most interesting figure, Father Virgilio said. Though he was canonized, many thought him a false prophet, even the Prince of Darkness. He initiated the disastrous Second Crusade, resulting in the destruction of the Crusader armies and the eventual return to the Holy Land, to Islam. Bernard also inaugurated the infamous Order of Templars, whose mission was to defend Solomon's temple at Jerusalem against the Saracen 200 years later. They were suppressed for heresy. Here at Melk, we have illuminated texts of the many sermons St. Bernard delivered on the Canticle of Canticles and dedicated to King Solomon. But as Father Virgilio turned and headed off down the long room, distant bells started clanging in my head, and not for his mention of Song of Songs. As we followed our shepherd, I scanned the books lining the shelves to my right and the contents of the imposing glass cases to my left. And I racked my brain, trying to figure out exactly what was bugging me about this black-clad priest. For one thing, Wolfgang hadn't mentioned any spiritual guide on today's agenda, nor any nightly orders I ought to be boning up on. I studied Virgilio as we followed him, and all at once I bristled with anger. Without those priestly vestments, but with the addition of a dark, battered hat, Father Virgilio might well be the spitting image of someone else. Then I recalled that those few whispered words I'd heard in the vineyard last night had been in English, not German. By the time Father Virgilio stopped before a large glass case near the end and turned to us, I was seething with fury at Wolfgang. Is this not a great work of art? He asked, gesturing to the richly detailed hand-colored manuscript Beneath the glass, he glanced at from Wolfgang to me with dewy eyes and fingered his crucifix. I nodded with a wry smile and said in my rusty German, also, oh boy, we're going to speak German. Vader, wenn Sie trun hier mit uns sind, was tut Hans Claus? So, if you're here with us now, Father, what's Hans Claus up to today? That's the translation. The priest glanced in confusion at Wolfgang, who turned to me and said, Ich wusste nicht, dass du Deutsch kannst. I didn't realize you could speak German. Nicht sehr will, aber sicherlich mehr als unser Österreicher Herr. I told him coolly. My goodness, I hope you don't speak German because I'm sure massacring this. Not very much, but surely more than our Austrian archivist here. I think perhaps you've helped us enough for the moment, Father, Wolfgang told the priest. Could you wait in the annex while my colleague and I have a word? Virgilio bowed twice, said a few quick scusas, and bustled from the room. Wolfgang had leaned over the glass case with folded arms and was gazing down at the gilded manuscript. His handsome patrician features were reflected in the glass. It's magnificent, isn't it? He observed, as though nothing had happened. But of course, this copy was executed several hundred years after St. Bernard's time. Wolfgang, I interrupted this revelry. He straightened and looked at me with clear, guileless, turquoise eyes. That morning, back in my apartment in Idaho, as I recall, you assured me you would always tell me the truth. What exactly is going on here? The way he was looking at me would have melted the Titanic's iceberg, and I confess it did a pretty good job on me, but that wasn't all the ammo up his sleeve. I'm in love with you, Ariel, he said, simply and directly. If I say that there are matters in which you must simply trust me, I expect you to believe me, to believe in me. Do you understand? Is this not enough? I'm afraid not, I told him firmly. To do him credit, he registered no surprise, just complete attention, as if waiting for something. I wasn't sure exactly how to say what I knew I must. Last night, I believed I was falling in love with you too, I told him sincerely. His eyes narrowed as they had when he'd passed me at that first day in the annex lobby. But I couldn't hold back my frustration. How could you make love to me that way? I said, glancing to be sure no one could overhear. Then turn around and lie to me, as you did in the vineyard. Who is this damn Father Virgillio following us around like a wraith? Like a wraith. Sorry, there's an I there. I suppose you do deserve an explanation, he agreed, rubbing one hand over his eyes. Then he looked at me again with an open expression. Father Virgilio truly is a priest from Trieste. I've known him for years. He has worked for me, though not in the capacity I told you earlier. More recently, by doing research here in this library. And I did want you to meet him, but not late last night when I had other things in mind. He smiled a little self-consciously. After all, he is a priest. Then what was all that Hans Claus business this morning, if you knew we were coming here to meet him? I was worried last night when you thought Virgilio looked familiar, Wolfgang said. Then this morning when I made that slip and you pursued it, it was already too late to change plans. How could I imagine you'd be able to recognize him from earlier yesterday, just by one glimpse in the darkness last night and at such a distance? I was getting that deja vu all over again feeling as I racked my brain for when I'd seen Father Virgilio earlier. But I didn't have to ask. You have every right to despise me for what I've done, said Wolfgang apologetically. But it was such short notice. When I learned I wouldn't be joining you and Dassy and Bassarides for lunch, that man is so unpredictable. I shouldn't have been surprised if he'd spirited you away and I'd never seen you again. Luckily, I had chosen a restaurant where they knew me well enough to accept Virgillio as a temporary employee to look out for you during the afternoon. So that was it. No wonder he seemed familiar to me in the vineyard. In my frenzied preoccupation yesterday afternoon at the Cafe Central, I'd hardly glanced at the faces around me. Yet, I must have registered that same figure performing some service around our table, perhaps half a dozen times. Now, torn between relief and worry, I wondered just how much of our impromptu busboy had overheard of our luncheon conversation. Though it seemed Wolfgang had only been trying to protect me from the vagaries of my unknown grandfather, I cursed myself for not being more vigilant, as Sam had taught me all through childhood. But I had no chance to dwell on these thoughts. Father Virgilio, peering through the entrance doors, seemed to have decided that adequate dust had settled to cushion his return. Seeing him, Wolfgang bent toward me and spoke quickly. If you can read Latin half as well as you speak German, I shouldn't comment in front of Virgilio on the first line of this manuscript of St. Bernard's. It might embarrass him. I looked down at the book and shook my head. What does it say? Divine love is reached through carnal love, said Wolfgang with a complacent smile. Later, when we a free moment together, I'd like to test that theory. Father Virgilio had arrived with a map of Europe, a modern one. He unfolded it on a trestle table before us and said, "It is important that from ancient times, a mysterious tribe in this region held the female bear as their totem, and that they were possessed of an almost mystical reverence for a substance with many alchemical properties. Salt. More and more interesting. And remember, Sam's totem spirit is a bear, a mama bear and a baby bear. Interesting. All right, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.